day. Now, vanadium is used to harden steel. It's probably found in the car in your driveway. The original Model T Ford used vanadium improved steel. Vanadium is not something we discuss often on commodities, but get this, demand could double over the next few years. Let's take a look at the metal. We're joined by Doug Horn, analyst at CPM Group. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So it's a tiny market right now. It's 75,000 tons roughly worldwide. I mean, compared to copper, which is millions of tons. Why is vanadium interesting, though?
I mean, yeah, this is a niche metal, but it's a critical metal. It's used about 90% in steel alloying, and these are in applications that range from, as you mentioned it, the car to bridges to oil and gas infrastructure and power generation components. So these are kind of critical metals. It's a small market, but its uses are very niche and required by steel consumers.
So the demand curve is going to be pretty steep. I mean, they have to have this stuff.
They have to have it, and you know, this is a play on kind of the energy space and building in the energy space. We all know that kind of investment is required there. And in China, interestingly, they've been implementing new rebar standards, which require their steel for construction to be much, much stronger.
So we've heard about lousy construction in China.
Exactly. This was actually
after the earthquake.
Exactly, a consequence of the earthquake. So we've seen kind of large intensity of use gains in Chinese steel consumption.
Well, give us an idea of supply, because most of the vanadium is produced just as a byproduct of smelting steel.
Yeah. About 60% of supply comes from the ancillary process of steelmaking. Not every iron ore has vanadium mineralization in it, but those that do, particularly in Russia, China, and South Africa, is where you get vanadium slag from. Another big portion of supply comes from what we would consider typical mining operations, and then there's a whole chunk of supply that comes from hydrocarbon residues. So the Canadian fans are actually a large supplier of vanadium in the secondary market.
That's interesting. And it's also used to produce sulfur, I think, which is interesting.
It's used in specialty chemicals.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you mentioned China, South Africa, and Russia, and that's where all the vanadium comes from right now, basically.
More or less, yeah.
So what about new sources of supply? I mean, are there new big mines coming online?
Yeah, so, I mean, the challenge for miners is that they need to compete in terms of economics with the slag producers. So right now there's a mine under development in Australia. It's just being commissioned by Atlantic Limited. It's the Windamura mine, which is actually a restart from Xstrata. And kind of the next in line will be Largo Resources, which is developing a very high-grade deposit in Brazil.
And they're TSX listed?
They are TSX listed.
It sounds like it's going to be tough, though. If you're competing with people who just produce it as a byproduct, they don't care what they sell it for. That's going to be tough if you're a primary producer, I guess.
You know, it's somewhat challenging. You need to get the economics right in terms of on the mine, but at the end of the day, this is a very concentrated market, and there is kind of supplier power there to kind of keep prices elevated. It's a question of dynamics and kind of what the behavior is of the current producers.
What about China? I mean, they're a big supplier. Have they been restricting exports of vanadium in any way?
So over the past 5 years, we've seen China kind of pull back its exports of vanadium, and in particular focus on exporting higher value vanadium products. What's happened kind of as a result of that is kind of some supplies have been pulled out of the international market, and kind of Western world producers have had to pick up the slack there. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, what about the price? Can you tell us about vanadium prices?
Our view on prices is that we're going to see kind of a slow upward creep through the end of the year. Our view is that kind of industrial production will pick up in the second half of the year. The concerns about China's hard landing are kind of not, kind of probably somewhat overblown, particularly considering the price movement.
Sorry, Doug. So we're looking at the price. So it spiked in the 2008 commodity frenzy. It's really done much of anything since then.
Yeah, it's had a real tough time recovering after the recession. I think there's been very volatile demand conditions, and as a result, the suppliers have not been able to react as swiftly as they might have been in other markets. So we've seen some pop-ups. They've come down, but really prices have not been able to recover as forcefully as some other industrial metals.
Now, as you know, there's quite a bit of hype in the space, and a lot of the producers, or would-be producers, are saying it's great for batteries, both small batteries and then gigantic batteries that could store power from a wind installation or a solar installation. Is that likely to really add to demand?
I mean, I don't ever want to kind of underestimate the power of technology and innovation, but right now this market is a steel market. We're kind of closely tracking it. Our long-term outlook contains some scenarios for battery adoption. But at the end of the day, this is kind of not a game changer in the next decade, but it is something we're tracking closely.
It seems as though the big vanadium grid storage, it's still at the pilot stage.
Yeah, there's about 25 megawatts of power that's been installed since 1996 around the world. It's kind of relatively small, and it's costly. I think that's the key to adoption. And as we know, there's kind of a lot of innovation and research going into this space. The question is, does the vanadium battery win? I think it's a little bit too early to tell.
So you're not looking for a huge spike anyway in vanadium prices, steady appreciation more likely?
We think the next 2-3 years will actually be quite strong for prices. Okay. Thereafter, a lot of supply is coming online, and I think that'll hinge on what the outlook is in China, Europe, and Japan and the U.S.
Thanks very much, Doug. Really good rundown.
Thank you for having me.
Doug Horne is an analyst at CPM Group. Now, CPM doesn't follow stocks per se, but let's have a quick look at some vanadium producers. Of course, we're not recommending these, but you might want to. Largo Resources, Doug already mentioned that one. They have a potential big project on the way. American Vanadium's another name. ABC, Apella Resources, and Energizer Resources. They have a project on the go in Madagascar. American Vanadium is in the United States. Right, well, there's vanadium for you.